Hey everybody, and welcome to DGS Productions. I'm your host, D.G.S. Hey everybody, and welcome to this week's episode. This week we are going to recap Worlds in all of its glory. Well, Worlds has come and gone, and just like we predicted last week, there was no shortage of excitement or drama this past weekend at Worlds. Before we move on to some tournament analysis, let's talk a little bit about some things we noticed in the commentary and through the videos. First things first, big shout out to all the media coverage that happened this past weekend at Worlds. It was an exciting Worlds and we got to see every bit and piece, even with no live streaming. We had D.G.S Productions putting out quality videos. We had CCDG putting out quality videos. We had Prodigy Disc, Marty McFly out there as well doing some FPO coverage. And then we had Disc Golf Guy covering each night recap, which was something very nice to have. I would have liked to have seen more cards, but at this point we only have so many photographers there and so many videographers there. I'm so glad that we had so much to watch anyway. This whole week I've only been able to manage to get through all of MPO. FPO is next on my list and I'm excited to get through that. On the D.G.S Productions side of things, we had Steve Hill from Ulti-World Disc Golf join the commentary booth with Big Germ Jeremy Colling, and that brought a new perspective into the booth. It definitely brought in the objective, the non-professional player viewpoint, but it still was missing a little bit of things. As it went on, it started to kind of lag, and I think I pinpointed exactly why that was. With Big Germ and with Steve Hill, we have two good color commentators, but nobody who's actually calling action out there. And Big Germ was actually forced into that role a little bit more. Not that I'm sure that was discussed before, but I think Big Germ just likes the mic, and so he really took over probably 90% of the mic time, which is fine. But then there was another 10% which seemed a little bit just uncharacteristic for these videos. Don't get me wrong, great coverage, great commentary, great insight, but just as they're refining things, I'd like to see them definitely work in somebody who's got a little bit more of that, play-by-play call, taking maybe 60% of the airtime, and then somebody else who's got more of that color commentary and who can really expound upon that, add some personal touches, or add some experience to that for the rest of that 40%, I think would be really, really refined, really, really great product coming out. So something that mixes a little bit more of CCDG's coverage with the color commentary that we usually get from D.G.S Productions. In CCDG we get Ian Anderson and Cody Merle this week, and they do a great job. You can definitely tell the chemistry is there. Ian Anderson definitely takes on a little bit more of that play-by-play, letting you know what's going on, but not exactly telling you bit by bit, oh, he missed this gap, or oh, he's a little bit left. He adds a little bit more color to it, which makes it really, really easy to listen to. And then Cody really expands upon that, gives a little bit more as the actual videographer there, some experience that was had, maybe some emotions or some interactions that you don't catch on the video, but that do lend insight into the rounds. And those are things that I really appreciate when watching these videos. So as these guys continue to improve, I really look for them to kind of flesh that out. D.G.S Productions really still kind of feeling its way around the commentary booth, I feel like. So it'll be nice to kind of see some people come in and come out and some growth begin to happen there, as well as in CCDG, always bringing in new stuff. I feel like Ian and Cody get so much better each year, and that they have other guest commentators coming in which add another light to that as well. So overall, really, really good coverage this weekend. Prodigy as well, one of the most underrated YouTube channels for disc golf. pumping out some great stuff on the FPO side. Haven't had a chance to watch that yet, but I know from Marty's past work that this is going to be some good stuff to watch. Not necessarily any commentary there to speak of, which is pretty typical for Marty's style, but something that it kind of predates all of this kind of flashy stuff back maybe 4 or 5 years ago when it was just the solid staples and no commentary. Piggybacking off of that, shout out to all the videographers there. This was not an easy course or courses to video. Oh my goodness, trees everywhere, lines everywhere, not necessarily in the same spot though. You had either a left line or a right line, or you had a forehand or you had a backhand line. So for those guys to set up and try and figure out maybe ahead of time which way they're gonna go, that is huge. So great job on them. There was not a whole lot that was missed, only a couple shots that I remember that was like, well, that got lost in the sky, we can't figure out where it was. So great job by all those videographers out there. You had Simon doing Simon things, which definitely put another chink in the armor, and then you just had so many different lines, a bunch of forehand shots that we're not used to be seeing, and then a bunch of scramble golf, which I'm sure is not easy to record. One thing I started to begin to notice, and I've noticed in the past but never put to words how this could be kind of equated onto the video, is everybody always says, oh, this video doesn't do justice on the elevation here. And I'd really like to see in those opening credits, maybe then those flybys or those whole previews, that we see a little bit of information on that elevation change. Whether it's in foot, or whether we see kind of a grade percentage, or we get a little bit of a graphic to kind of show how steep or how how far downhill that these shots really are. I think that would definitely add a little bit more perspective from the viewer's point. I understand we're not going to get into 3D graphics yet, and that is totally fine. That is way outside the realm of my understanding of computers and of graphics design. But I do think there's some numbers and some graphics that we can implement to give the viewer a little bit more of that, and that way we don't have to refer to that tale as old as time, which is, oh, this video doesn't really show how drastically uphill it is. We definitely have no lack of great shots this past weekend, including this Simahawk from Simon Lizotte. Simon going 1,060 feet on hole 9 in 2 shots. Missing the eagle opportunity. Devin Owens with an amazing shot on hole 5, shooting a 7 under in the front 9 in round 2. And of course, you gotta have an MJ Comet shot. Hole 5, round 2, completely pure as this. Just a beautiful shot here by MJ. Very little funny nuance we see in round 3 coverage by CCDG is on the Latitude 64 card we have Cameron Colglazer and Ricky Wysocki. Ricky is a known Cleveland fan, not wearing a hat that day, didn't also wear a hat for the most part on round 4 as well. But in round 3 we see Cameron Colglazer, I believe a native of Alabama, pulling out the Golden State hat. I'm sure that definitely warranted some conversation before, after, or during the round between Cameron and Ricky. In round 3, hole 14, we also see a Ricky falling putt, but then the commentators and the players themselves actually just laugh it off. It was probably a 12-foot putt, something that Ricky is bound to make and will make maybe 99.99% of the time. And Johnny McRae's standing right there, Devin Owens is standing right there. They see it blatantly happen right there, and nobody calls the foot fault, and they laugh it off because what's the point in calling it when Ricky's just going to turn around and make it? I thought that was really funny. Kind of some class there, not necessarily bringing a negativity to the card, which I'm sure would have definitely brought it around a little bit. Ricky definitely would have made that putt again, I have no doubt about. Both companies, DGS Productions and CCDG, doing a great job of showing the whole previews without using the drone footage, since they weren't allowed to use the drones on the W.R. Jackson course. So that was really nice to see. On one end we had a really nice kind of 2D version showing the line, something you might see on a T-pad. And then on the other side we had some just fading shots, that way you could kind of see the fairway. DGS Productions also stepped up their game and added a couple different graphics here and there. We saw on the last day, on round 4, both on the front and the back 9, we see some blurbs of how Paul is doing, because Paul really makes a surge in that round 4. So just to see that in context with what was going on at that time, obviously Paul being a hole behind, you get to see that score there, really kind of how he's pushing and where he's pushing to. Instead of there at the end of the recap where you just see and hear about Paul's amazing round, you get to kind of hear about it in between, which is very nice. And then in addition to that, at the end of the round 4, back 9, we see a graphic on some stats for Ricky, which was really nice, really well done, really pretty graphics, but also gave you some insight as to how Ricky got his 2-time world champion and how much he really handled those courses. That 5.5% of bogeys is just phenomenal. I'm sure if you look at everybody's score and everybody's percentages from that, he is by far, obviously, the highest, but by a huge margin, I would think. Now on to the tournament itself. Coming into Worlds and throughout Worlds, as well as at the end of Worlds, we've had the same conversation happen in multiple different venues and resulting in multiple different conclusions. And that question is going to be posed as, this was only a 4-round Worlds. In previous Worlds, we've had 5 rounds, we've had 6 rounds, we've had 7 rounds. It really becomes a marathon event. Something that not necessarily somebody can get hot on a couple days and totally eclipse the entire field. It really takes a solid player, a really rounded player, to consistently play throughout that time. And so a lot of people were saying that since this is a 4-round tournament, this really gives a little bit more of a leeway to somebody who does get hot and who can maintain that hotness for a little while. So my big input on this is, did it really matter this time? Yes, Ricky had this huge lead and he continued to have this huge lead, but I don't think it really mattered. These were terrible conditions from the way it seemed. There were gnats everywhere, the humidity was huge, the weather was up and down. If you played in the morning, it was fine. If you played, towards noon or the late afternoon, it was hot. It would, got even more sticky. And we had some weather come in there. We had rain. We had some wind really pick up there in round 4 as well. But I don't really think it had a whole lot of effect on how this was. You saw those players who were maybe a little bit younger or who had a little bit of a less confidence really kind of break down over time, just because of the length of these courses, the viciousness of these courses. These were not easy courses at all. These were probably the tightest fairways we've seen all year. So to me, did it really matter? And my answer is going to be no. If this was in Southern California and we were playing at La Mirada, that would be a different circumstance. There we've got perfect weather. They're probably dealing with a little bit of wind, but it's not atypical, and they're just playing 1 round of casual, maybe 18-hole golf. And so 4 rounds of that, yeah, you can see somebody getting hot and surpassing 1 or 2 spots, or jump into the top 10 or the top 5, because they get really hot for those 4 days. On these holes though, on this course, that would have been really tough to do. We saw some people surge to the top, but most of the people that surged to the top were the cream of the crop, and the people who had really put in the time in the courses to get to that spot. Next year, with them going to Vermont, it'll be interesting to see how they react to all of this. Are they going to lengthen it a little bit more? Are they going to have a 2-round day on one day? Are they going to maybe stretch it out to Tuesday? Are they going to play on a Sunday instead? It'll be interesting to see how they do. But like I said, on this really tough course, which is only a small sample size and a small circumstance really, that this proved hard enough, grueling enough, and vicious enough that the cream of the crop really did rise to the top. So I think maybe in the future we see this grow a little bit more. We see this grow to an acceptable amount of maybe 5 or 6, especially depending on where we are. As far as results go, we got obviously Ricky Wysocki taking home the top spot and that world title, followed very closely by a powerful surge in round 4 by Paul Macbeth, a standard and nice comeback for Simon Lizotte taking the 3rd spot, and then Johnny McRae with those 2 hot opening rounds to tie Simon Lizotte in that 3rd spot. Devin Owens and then Chris Dickerson also taking 5th place, rounding out the top 5. A big shout out to Austin Turner, Discraft sponsored player, who just got bumped up to the Elite Discraft team, taking 7th at Worlds, followed by Cameron Colglazer and Nate Doss taking 8th. And tied for 10th is both Zach Melton of DD and Adam Hammis. Other finishes to take note of are going to be Michael Johansson finishing tied for 12th, Steve Brinster jumping in the top 15, tied with Jeremy Colling at the 15 spot. Logan Bowers playing pretty solidly and tying for 17th with 2 others. And James Conrad, Cameron Todd, Bobby Music, Philo Brathwaite, Lance Brown, who shot an amazing first couple rounds, and Eagle McMahon, Josh Anton, all finishing outside the top 20 but above the top 30. Everybody who I thought was going to be up there was pretty much up there, with the exception of one kid, and that's going to be Adam Hammis, an Innova sponsored player who jumped to the top and really had a substantial round in round 1 and 2, and then also continued that on camera in round 3. His first time, for my knowledge, being on camera, especially with a crowd that big. And he really played solidly in round 3. In round 4, we get to see him a little bit, we get to see that youngness in his game, as he gets a little bit frustrated and can't get over the hump, which is something that's just human coming from him. But not necessarily a name I had heard before. Guys like Austin Turner, we've talked about Anthony Barella, we've talked about a bunch of other young guns, Drew Gibson, etc. We've even seen Cameron Colglazer here and there. He is one to scare that lead card and to scare that top 5. So it was nice to see some coverage on him and to see him get some face time as well. But this was really a surprise to see Adam Hammis on the top, and great for him. And I hope to see him kind of grow and to build off of this experience and maybe get up there and constantly scare that top 20 and then grow with these younger players, these Austin Turners, Peter McBrides, Anthony Barellas, as they continue to grow into the future of disc golf. After round 1, I'm not gonna lie, I felt really good about myself. In last week's video, I pretty much projected everybody who's gonna be there in that top 10, especially on the top 8. We saw MJ, we saw Johnny McRae pop up there, we had Simon, we had Eagle, we had all the good names up there, and that was really great to see. Really great to see Johnny McRae play as well as he did. CCDG had a little bit of tidbit that said that he had been there for a couple weeks, and I don't doubt that. He is really a devoted person, really emotional, really plays a smart game. So for him to be out there for a couple weeks, we saw him throw forehands when, like they mentioned, maybe 5 or 10 times every video, we'd never see a Johnny McRae forehand, but he was throwing them on a couple holes exclusively, sometimes back to back, which is very rare as well. But he just played a really smart game, really propelled himself in those top 2, and then from there we saw in rounds 3 and 4 the putting kind of lose a little bit of momentum. And that might have been because of a couple different factors, but he was missing here, missing there. In round 4, we see him kind of pick that up a little bit more, and he puts his headphones in, gets a little bit more drive behind that, and then starts nailing those putts again. But in round 3, we see him get a little bit distracted. And through the commentary, we learn that there are people in his line, maybe behind the basket, directly in his line that are moving, or people behind him talking. And this is something that's starting to grow in disc golf, especially as the fan base and the tournament viewership is definitely growing. This is something that is a problem and is continuing to pop up here and there. With guys with Ricky and Paul, you don't necessarily see that phase that much, but it's definitely very present. So a question that I would pose is it the player's duty to be able to focus in that much, to nail that putt, and to not actually have to worry about your viewer behind you? For instance, in ball golf, you have thousands of people maybe on the green, maybe not in close as proximity as these guys were, but thousands of people who are, yes, they're going to be quiet because they're respecting the players, but there's going to be some noise there with that many people. So is it on the player there, or is it on the fan? And I think it's a combination of both. I think the fans really need to start learning a little bit of tournament viewership, but I also think that's a little bit on the tournament directors. I saw a lot in this tournament of people just walking in the middle of fairways, and people maybe as the chase card was catching up to the lead card, you would see the shots almost reach the gallery and be maybe 5-10 feet away from the gallery. So I don't think that there was a whole lot of corralling that was going on here. I know that Disc Golf Pro Tour does a really, really good job of that corralling, and maybe that wasn't present here at the Worlds. But I would like to see that continue to be developed over the next couple of years in disc golf, and as the live viewership continues to grow as well. Because people want to go see those 500-foot drives. It looks great on camera, trust me, it looks great on camera, but it looks 10 times better when you're there and you actually get to see Paul, drive at 500 feet with ease, or Ricky, have a putt that is maybe 80 feet out that is so much different from the video. So I really encourage, yes, this live viewership, but I also think that some people need to get a little bit smarter about this, and that this will continue to grow. So I don't think this is something that will continue to be a thing. I think it's going to phase out. I think people are going to get used to it. I think people are going to adapt to it. Players are going to adapt to it. They're going to get better at it. They're going to find ways to get out of their own head, or maybe direct that energy somewhere else. Or maybe perhaps be a little bit proactive of it, asking those viewers to move prior to your shot and then taking that extra 10 seconds. I feel like nobody on that card would have doubted or called time on Johnny McRae if he would have taken that extra time. And that's not just saying that this is all Johnny McRae's fault. There are lots and lots of disc golfers who have this. You could go to your weekly and you will definitely get this. You'll get people who are rustling leaves and people get mad at this. So this is just something that gets talked about in disc golf in general, not pointing out Johnny McRae, but something that's interesting that definitely came up during this tournament and during the commentary. But Johnny McRae wasn't the only Latitude player out there. We saw a slew of Latitude players rise to the top here. At one point we even had round 3, the entirety of the lead card was consisted of Latitude players. We had Cameron Cole-Glazer, we had Ricky Wysocki, we had Johnny McRae, and we had Devin Owens all there competing. And I'm sure that was really fun. These guys definitely know each other from touring. Ricky's putting was on fire, just period, just on fire. You watch those videos, he barely misses. I believe in round 3, hatless Rick, as I like to say it, round 3, round 4 is hatless Rick. He made everything outside the circle, maybe 60 feet and up, except for one putt on hole 9, which I think was maybe a 40-footer. So his putting really, really catapulted him to the top.
And that is official. That is a course record. 13 down, one-upping Johnny's 12 down in the first round.
On the other side, we saw Paul McBeth really jump in there. He had some tough shots off the tee and really couldn't capitalize in his scramble game. But Ricky was able to adjust with his scramble game and get those putts in to make this a phenomenal showing. So needless to say, I'm humbled to put to rest my Riki Waisaki putting analysis that I had a couple weeks ago that said that he was having troubles here and troubles there, and that he was losing a little bit of confidence at points. He really seemed to have it dialed in. Whatever he was working on or working with, it worked really well and at the exact right time. This was what he needed to catapult him to that two-time world championship. Riki didn't just show off his exceptional putting on the putting green, but he showed how precise he could be off the tee as well as in his scramble game. People often give Riki a little bit of a denotation when they say that he doesn't get off the tee the best, but he can definitely putt the best. And I think that was kind of the opposite. Riki really improved this week to hit those lines that he needed to hit, and these were tight quarters. Sadly, we didn't get any Riki Waisaki round 2 coverage, but those guys can't be everywhere. And something interesting that people are bringing up here and there is we never actually saw a Paul and Riki card this week at all, which is very interesting. Usually you think it's a Riki and Paul battle, they're going to be neck and neck, and they're going to be on that same card battling back and forth, but in this case we saw them in separate cards the entirety of the tournament. So maybe that FaceTime either helped or hurt, or was just a very different feeling for both of them. I know Riki mentions it in Ultiworld's most recently released podcast, so if you want to check that out, I will post a link to the podcast in the description below. Paul, on the other hand, had a couple missteps on a couple days that he just couldn't seem to shake. In rounds 2 and round 3, we see him kind of just come off early in his tee shots and not necessarily get where he wants off the tee shots. Granted, he had some bad kicks, he also had some good kicks. Riki had some good kicks and not too many bad kicks. So there was a little bit of difference there, but Paul really didn't have the scramble game, or the scramble success probably is what we should say, in rounds 2 and rounds 3. In round 4, however, Paul comes out firing. After round 3, he posts a Twitter and Instagram post saying really the championship is out of his reach, but that he is going to do everything he can to rise to the top. And he certainly did that. He comes out firing, and that's probably the more enjoyable card to watch, and that's because we got to see Paul play a little bit more aggressive. We saw some big shots off the tee, we saw some gutsy scramble plays, and we saw some good putts. We saw some putts that really had some oomph behind them and found the chains. We started to see him make those 30, 40, and 50-foot shots from that standard stance putt that he recently switched over back to. So it was really good to see kind of the Paul of old make a little bit of a revitalization. In holes 17 and 18 on round 4 though, he did have some pretty short putts that he missed. That might have been mind games, that might have been just mental fatigue after going through all of that and not necessarily having the focus that he needed. But that is something that was apparent. It'll be interesting to see how these two players and how the entirety of the field takes this moving forward. This week is a little bit of a lax week. We have some players going over to Europe to prep for some Euro Tour events as well as then the European Open. On the other side, we've got some smaller tier tournaments over here in the States. So there's a little bit of a Worlds hangover, especially after the amount of coverage that we had coming into this week. It'll be a little bit of a downfall so everybody can get caught up. Overall, very solid Worlds, very enjoyable Worlds. Congratulations once again to Riki Waisaki on his 2-time World Championship. For the next couple of weeks, with the ease up of the disc golf schedule, DGS Productions is going to be trying out some new things. If there's anything in particular you'd like to have us try out, feel free to comment in the section below. We are always willing to have feedback from you guys, and we really appreciate it. And as always, feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and check us out on Facebook for all your disc golf needs throughout the week. And until the next round, I'm DGS. news updates in the disc golf world, there it is. I found it. I found a fly. It's been buzzing this entire time. I'm gonna get it.